my favorite piece of advice, which I tell everybody, is raise the round when you feel the best about the business. It's not 500K MRR, it's not a million ARR. You can ask one person who had to have 4 million ARR and another person who needed 100K ARR. There's not one special bullet number. It's when you feel the best about the business and you have a really clear idea of how much you want to raise and what you want to use it for. That is the key.
Welcome to Fundraising Demystified, the podcast where we uncover the untold stories of successful founders who have raised venture capital to bring their visions to life. Join me, Jason Kirby, your host, as we dive into the hidden truths of the fundraising game. We'll explore different strategies, tactics, lessons learned from these entrepreneurs who have figured out how to win the fundraising game in their own way. Whether you're a budding entrepreneur, just getting started, or an established founder looking to scale your business, this podcast equips you with the knowledge and inspiration to conquer the fundraising landscape. Welcome to Episode 1. I'm Jason Kirby, your host of Fundraising Demystified, and I'm excited to introduce our podcast with our first founder, and actually a first-time founder who's raised this $11 million Series A. We're welcoming Jeff Beck to the show, CEO and co-founder of AnswersNow, and a platform that enables support for autism. And they've done an amazing job expanding and growing their market and picking up tremendous traction. We're excited to share his story and, more importantly, the tips and tricks that led to him having an oversubscribed Series A and a ton of fundraising tips that you'll want to listen to when it comes to diligencing the VCs that you potentially might have invest in your round, among many other tips when it comes to building relationships with VCs, especially as a first-time founder that didn't have a history of fundraising before. So we're very excited to introduce our very first episode of the podcast with Jeff Beck, and we'll go ahead and get started. Hey Jeff, welcome to the podcast. We're so happy to have you. Happy to learn more about your background and AnswersNow. It'd be great if you can tell the audience a little bit more about your background, how you got started, and kind of what the origin story is of AnswersNow.
Sure. So my background is as a licensed clinical social worker. So I spent the early part of my career as an in-home and outpatient therapist. I then spent some time in community-based services and then in value-based care. And across all those experiences, I saw two prevailing challenges. One is just access to quality therapy, and that the therapy that was being delivered was incredibly expensive for either the individual or the payer. And so this was 2016, 2017, advent of the Talkspaces and BetterHelps of the world. And it seemed like in the special needs space, neurodiverse space, there could be some value to connecting families and parents and individuals with autism directly to a master's level clinician. So at AnswersNow, that is what we do. We connect families to their own personal master's level clinician called a board certified behavior analyst over a proprietary platform that we built specifically designed for the needs of this type of learner and parent. So that's what we do. And that's quick 30 seconds on how it all started.
No, I appreciate that. And if you could kind of give a little bit more background, because I think the story is amazing. You're helping kids with autism and helping them with a solution that can immediately impact them. Kind of give us a little bit more about the types of customers you support and kind of how your business model works as well.
Yeah, so in the very early days, 2018, 2019, it was really, we used like HIPAA compliant Slack, and parents would, hit our Stripe and they'd sign up for a month and we'd connect them with a clinician. And we started to see some pretty awesome, quality outcomes. For example, the first win, I remember my co-founder and I were pretty blown away. Like, we didn't know if we'd be able to help these kiddos. We had a 12-year-old who was afraid of automatic flushing toilets. So he's a sensory issue for a 12-year-old with autism. It's pretty common. So he was afraid to go into public because he didn't know what kind of toilet they had. And if you don't know what kind of toilet they have, you can't go to the bathroom. And so it makes a ton of sense. And within a couple of weeks, one of our clinicians, who I didn't even know, was able to walk the mom through a couple of techniques over the course of a couple of weeks that she could do 20 minutes a day. And within a few weeks, like, he wasn't afraid of these toilets. And we're like, holy smokes, like, you can certainly serve this population without ever seeing them in person, which was thought to be impossible. So then we initially went to payers in 2018, 2019. We're like, hey, we can save you all a lot of money because we can take some of your less severe learners and improve their outcomes. And you don't have to pay $100,000 a year, which is kind of the status quo for ABA services. And every payer told us there's no way you can help these kids without seeing them in person. They're not gonna be able to improve and slam the doors. then roughly March of 2020, they were like, "Hey, what is it? How does this thing work again?" And so that was obviously a huge, huge tailwind for us. And we went through the arduous process of getting in network with payers. It's a long road.
So it sounds like, COVID was an acceleration for your business, and, bringing the realities that yes, it is possible to service these kids, and especially because there's no alternative in this current state of the world, and that kind of helped accelerate your business despite, the drag that it is working with payers and large corporations and whatnot. So something I think, what our audience likes to listen to and hear about is kind of what's been the fundraising journey. So you kind of had the initial product with Stripe and kind of making things work, and now you
Yep.
kind of have some velocity. You've raised a successful Series A. Kind of share with us the fundraising journey from like kind of start to finish, and
Yeah.
kind of what are some of the highlights.
Yep. So we went through I'm in Richmond, Virginia. We went through a local accelerator, grant funded, no equity. We went through that accelerator. We raised $200,000 in pre-seed. I'm very adamant about it being pre-seed because there were no friends and there was no family. Right. It was just folks that I met in the ecosystem to scrap together five to $25,000 checks. And 6 months later, we went through Techstars. So that was kind of the second tranche of what I call our pre-seed. Brought the total pre-seed round to just under a million. We did that on a cap on a note. There, without geeking out about the legal structures of notes now, maybe another podcast. But there's so much I wish I had known when we went through that process 4 or 5 years ago about how to structure a cap on a note and a discount and um, liquidation preferences. And we were able to clean a lot of it up in the Series A, but in the very early stages when you're trying to cobble together some money, and I didn't know the difference between a convertible car and convertible debt at the time, we just kind of threw it all together. So that was where my fundraising journey started. We then so that was 2019. We were very scrappy. We burned no more than I'd say 50 grand in a month through that year into 2020. And then as the pandemic hit, we raised a very small bridge because we thought we could get insurance reimbursement. We proved that at the end of 2020. So the beginning of 21, we raised a priced seed round. So we raised just under 3 million in a priced seed. Under the belief that we could not only get reimbursed by insurance companies, but that we could scale this, right, and open a bunch of states and take on a bunch of new clients. Some things went according to plan, some did not. It took us much longer to get in network with many of the payers. There were fits and starts with our second state. We finally started to see some traction towards the end of the year. So we raised another very small, I think it was a $500,000 bridge. In the beginning of 22, and then ended up business really took off through 22 for a variety of reasons, which I'm happy to get into, and then closed the A at the end of last year.
Nice. That is, quite the journey, and I know you kind of glanced over the convertible note structure,
Yeah.
but I think having also had some similar mistakes in my first couple companies in a similar regard, it'd be interesting to kind of maybe unpack that a little bit more and kind of what would you wish you would have done as opposed to
Yeah.
what happened.
It's very hard. I try to remember. So with our Series A, we were really fortunate, had a ton of interest, and I had to say no to a lot of investors. It's hard to put myself back in the place where you feel like you're outside of the Walmart with a hat. Like, please invest in us, where you just will take any term you can get, right? So it a little bit of it is hindsight, but there was a mechanism that we learned about during Techstars where it's kind of a cap on a cap. Like depending on how big your company gets, right? You can have a cap on how much upside that note can provide to an investor, which we did in our second tranche, which I think is really smart and very fair. Otherwise, the investor is kind of rooting against you, or you're rooting against yourself from getting too big, right? Because you don't want $100 million valuation with a $5 million cap on your note because they're going to take so much of the company. So there's like a cap on a cap, which I think is a really interesting and meaningful resource to use in a convertible debt note to make it fair for both parties.
No, that's fair to. I'm glad you shared that, and I've heard some other stories where often people think of safes as like kind of the go-to, and kind of prior to safes becoming standardized, there was the traditional convertible note that,
Yep.
some founders don't realize that it's convertible and that there's a deadline on
Yep.
those convertible notes, and that
Yep.
come that deadline, if you didn't close out the note through an equity round, like you might be, have to pay that money and have to have a renegotiation with your investors to kind of make them whole, especially if you don't have, I would say, friendlies as the
Yeah.
investor.
So ours converted into equity
Mhm.
at maturity, and I believe we wanted our first tranche, that 250K tranche, to convert at maturity because of the way it was structured instead of a priced financing. So I think we actually punted on our next financing a few months so that we could convert those notes. So I mean, this is just the ins and outs of fundraising and financing your organization, and it's interesting. I mean, it's there's loopholes and things you have to be aware of, and I'm glad some of those note days are behind us. The safe is clean. The safe can be very clean. I think where people get tripped up, and even on the notes, right, or the pre-post, right? So when people are looking at ownership, when it converts, and where's the safe convert, and how, I would encourage folks to become savvy on how to have that conversation with an investor, because it can really matter in terms of ownership.
No, I would agree 100%. And then it looked like you said you also had a bridge between kind of the seed and the Series A. You
Yeah.
know, what was that experience like, and kind of what was the market feedback when you were going to market for that?
Yeah, so we had a couple of insiders that were on our cap table who were really bullish on what we were doing, and we wanted to make sure we didn't get into a situation where we would go to raise the Series A and only have 6 months of runway left, right? They're going to bleed you out, and you're not going to get a great deal, even if you find a good firm. So we kind of came together like, all right, what's the amount we want to raise to make sure if and when we do go to market for the EA, we're well capitalized, and what's a number that makes a lot of sense. So that is the one time we did a safe with a cap, no discount. It was just a cap on a safe, and it was super clean. It was basically like a one-page document. It's all internals except for one external. And that was a conversation because he didn't come to the table. He was a value add, and honestly, is one of the main reasons we raised our Series A. So I'm very glad we did it. But we did have one investor who has continued to be this kind of investor where they pushed back. So this is after the market had sunk. It was like April, May, June, some after the crash, after we had raised the bridge, and one more investor came in and said, I want the same terms as your bridge from 4 or 5 months ago. Um, and I really liked him. I thought he would be a great add. And we had one investor that was like, I think we should relook at, it was like, I'm not adding a 10% premium on the safe for this one person
Yeah.
in a collapsing economy during a war. Like, let's just get him in, right? Everybody agreed except for one person. And I'm really, really glad that we did. So we closed the first part of that bridge towards January, February, and then I think he came in April or May. It was a little over $1 million.
And so it sounds like you're pretty strategic in making sure you're well capitalized to be able to hit certain milestones to successfully raise a Series A. So, kind of
Yeah,
walk me through the capital rate and just like running the business, having to hit
yeah,
milestones to grow the business, and then going
yeah,
out to market for your
yeah.
Series A. Kind of like what was that experience from kind of realizing, okay, we're now Series A ready. What was
Yep.
your process from there?
God, I wish it was really clean science, right? Because I remember we had a founder con for one of our seed investors, like a conference for the founders, and I was finding anybody I could find who would raise an A. And they're like, tell me about your timeline, tell me about how you did this, how you did that. Was in July. And I got my favorite piece of advice, which I tell everybody, is raise the round when you feel the best about the business. It's not 500K MRR, it's not a million ARR. You can ask one person who had to have 4 million ARR and another person who needed 100K ARR. There's not one special bullet number. It's when you feel the best about the business and you have a really clear idea of how much you want to raise and what you want to use it for. That is the key. And so the business really took off in the first half of the year. I started to re-engage a few friendly investors in the third quarter, late August, early September. I had a list of about 25 who I'd either talked to before or somebody had said I needed to talk to them when I raised my Series A. And so I either asked for that introduction or I reached back out and said, hey, this is where the business is. I just want to learn if you think it's an interesting, kind of interesting story where we are and where we want to be in a year. And pretty quickly I could tell five or six of the firms were like, we want you to meet a partner. We want you like that. Just, like there, it's, you just know. I think it's Paul Graham or somebody who says it's like sex. Like when it's happening, right? You know when something's going on here, and so it's true, right? Like it just. We reached out to those 20 something friendlies, and more than half of them were like, "Do you have a data room? We want to meet you. We want you to meet our partners, and what are you thinking in terms of numbers?" And so I don't. And I've heard this can be atypical. I've heard it can be typical. Our first conversation was late August, and our term sheets all came in then like the beginning of October. So it went pretty quickly when we went to market.
No, that's fantastic. And I think you say something here that you kind of hit on very, very wisely of yourself here is like go to market when you feel the best about the business. VCs can kind of sniff out, kind of like false confidence and like the projection of success, but not really like, in success. And if you feel genuinely good about the state of your business, you just have a different energy about yourself when you come to the table that gives the VCs potentially like FOMO vibes if they don't take this seriously. And there's like, okay, this guy's got something going for him. Let's dive a little bit deeper. Let's unpack this, and it helps if your business is in a great position.
Yep.
It's often too many times founders raise money because they need money, not because they're worth the money and or in a position to really demonstrate a sexy story.
Yep.
And kind of as you kind of said, begging on the out front of Walmart for change as opposed to coming in with a lot more confidence and into the room with the right people. So that's incredible, insightful feedback, and it's goes to show. I'll ask you this question: like, what made you feel you got to that point in your business? Like, what was it about your operating or your sales or whatever
Yeah.
it was that led you to that confidence?
We had to pick and choose what to do well because of the money and size of the team. So we have new clients coming in. We're a two-sided marketplace. We've got new clients coming in. We've got new clinicians coming in. We've got a technology that's, handling more and more folks. We've got more insurance providers and more payers that we're tracking. We've got revenue cycle management. So when you are 10xing and 20xing year over year, billables and AR, like that starts to grow. And so it's a very complex business. And we had six, seven, eight full-time folks at the time of the A. And I like looked at a Series A investor. I was like, once I get this money, I can open a number of more states. I can rinse and repeat the way we went to market, and I can shore up this and shore up that. And this is where we're going to be in 3 years. And this is the conservative estimate. And this is the moonshot. And that's what you're investing in. So we just had plans for how we wanted to use the money. And it wasn't runway, right? While that's important, we knew our business really well. We knew where we made a margin. We knew how we made a margin. We knew what our lifetime value, CAC to lifetime value is now and what it will be at scale within reason. So the more you know about the business and the more you can teach the investor about your business, the more likely they are to perk up because you're showing that you have a plan for their money. And so that was my goal initially, was to show up and have a plan for the money. And it ultimately worked out.
So it's one thing to like a lot of founders say like they have their use of fund slides. It's like 35% marketing, 40%. Yeah, it's just like
That's right.
what you're communicating here is like here are the milestones that we're gonna hit. Like here's the growth trajectory. Here's like and again like kind of proving out a piece of your business, and then it's like copy paste.
Yep.
It's like not always that easy, but it's like it's like okay,
Yep.
we figured out a system, we've proven something here. And when you talk about how quickly your fundraise went, you basically kind of spoke, spread the word around, had a couple conversations, and then people threw themselves at you. That's a clear sign that you're on the right track from both a product standpoint, proving out your model. And when you do that as a business and you focus on that as your business, it's just so much easier to raise capital than it is if you're struggling on any of those fronts. Not what every founder wants to hear as they struggle to kind of get to certain places, but it is possible, and I'm
I mean,
glad.
what we did, Jason, I mean, we went internally and said, look, well, you're going to get a little bit of a deal, or you'll get a discount on the next round. That's what we do with the safe. And we were like, you've seen us. We sent out a monthly update. We meet with our board quarterly. You know our business. They're there. This is here, but we don't want to go out and raise a Series A when we have to raise money. Let's put a little bit of capital into the business. Give us a few more months. I'll never forget sitting in our board meeting in August, and we went to market just a few weeks later, and both of my board members were like, we're not quite sure if you're ready yet. And I'm bullish, Ron. Like, this thing's taking off. We got a wait list. Like, this is, and that's when I talked to a founder. And I was like, just go have some conversations in front of these. You're clearly excited about where the business is right now. And, I'm sure we'll get into some detail around how the A itself went, but I'm really glad I did it when I did it, because we found a partner who really understood what we were doing, and we're excited about it.
I definitely want to unpack the A a little bit more, but I also want to acknowledge the fact that, like, previous to this company, did you have any entrepreneurial effort? Like,
No,
entrepreneurial background, starting a
nothing.
business? Like,
I
I
never even
feel
had a lemonade stand. Like, I know the stories. Like, I sold baseball cards, then CDs, and I didn't do that. No, none of it. Right? It was just something that came in my late 20s. I found myself drawn to the How I Built This and the Reid Hoffmans, and the 0 to 1s and Shoe Dogs, and um, the more I spent, more time I spent in the kind of field of mental health. Again, this is before it had a huge, this is 2015, 2016. This is before it really got thrust into the mainstream from a VC perspective. I just felt like fundamentally that technology could improve the way that these families accessed care. So it all just kind of aligned. But yeah, no previous real entrepreneurial experience.
Yeah, it's rare you'll find a social worker go into raising tens of millions of dollars as an
Yeah,
entrepreneur.
yeah.
So it's inspiring to kind of see that. So I just wanted to kind of acknowledge that
No,
'cause
thank you.
I find that
Appreciate
to
it.
be pretty interesting aspect to your background. And I feel you also
Yeah,
articulate yourself. You've been through the ringer. It hasn't
yeah,
been you didn't start this business yesterday, so
that's right.
you've taken some punches, I'm sure. But
Absolutely.
um, let's go ahead and jump into kind of the structure of the Series A. So it's like
Yeah.
from prior to the term sheet, did you get multiple term sheets? Kind of walk us through that process.
Yeah. Yeah, so we started to have conversations, like I said, late August, early September, and and it was, I don't know if I ascribed it, like, put it in the ether and it happens, right? But my thing was like, I want this done before Thanksgiving. Our business has seasonality in December, right? Families go on vacation, our clinicians go on vacation. It's always going to be our lowest month. I was upfront with that with investors, but I did not want to be trying to move towards close in January when we've got a 10% dip in growth after month over month growth for however many months, right? So I was like, this is going to be done by Thanksgiving. I'm going to, I really did take my eyes off the business. You kind of have to. My CTO, Maury, was terrific at kind of playing the operator role and trying to keep all of the plates spinning while I spent, 80 to 90% of my time focusing on the fundraise. And that's pulling updated data and updating the deck and flights or Zooms or, it is, I had over 100 presentations. So I don't want to seem like, I talked to 20 people, I got 10 term sheets. That certainly wasn't it. And then they start to talk, right? Investors start to talk to investors, and I get from Andreessen to NEA, and then, oh, I know that person. You also already talked to this person, and that's kind of how it happens, right? So that was September, and I had 3 firms fly to Richmond to meet with me in person. I flew out to meet 2 in person. I think in total I had 8 meetings with partners, which is kind of like the final boss in my mind for the Series A. And we ended up with 3 term sheets. So I thought we'd end up with 8, 7, 8, and we ended up with 3, which I was super excited about. One interesting piece was I had a few who I met with a number of times that I really liked, and this is just me kind of reading between the lines and putting on my therapist hat. There's a little bit of like, you got term sheets in this environment. We've all agreed to sit on our hands and wait for all the companies to run out of money and come begging to us with crappy valuations. Like, how did you get 3 term sheets? This is ridiculous. We've all agreed to not do any term sheets. I had a couple of funds that were like, I need like 4 more weeks. And it was a 5 day. I got one term sheet on a Monday, the first one on a Monday, and they gave us 5 days. The other two trickled in during that week, and then I had a number of funds kind of elbowing for more time, and we said no, and we stuck. I wanted to get the relationship off. I mean, I know that you can negotiate these things, but I really liked the firm that and brought us our first term sheet, which was Left Lane. I liked the team a lot, and so I didn't want to screw around. It was and continues to be a pretty tough environment, so I didn't want to play games either. I was really excited. I couldn't think of a reason why I would go with somebody else. They knew the industry. I will say I met with them a few times throughout the course of the year, and I felt really good about it because they understood our industry. They knew all of our competitors. They understood our business model. They get what we're trying to do. So I think I'm an N of one, right? But I've had a few Series B conversations with investors, right? And if I find myself telling them what the letters ABA mean, I just don't think it's going to happen, right? Left Lane had conviction that there is a bet to be won in the space, and they wanted to back the winner, and they believe that's us. Um, and so that, my job's half done at that point, right? It's I give them the numbers, I show them I know what I'm talking about. They meet the team and they're terrific. I give them the plan and then we move forward, right? It's not me convincing them that first step that like there's a big opportunity here.
Yeah.
I personally feel like that would be really tough if you're trying to convince your Series A investor, independent of your company, that there's a big opportunity in the space that you're in, right? So again, that's my perception and that's my experience. I felt like we had a little bit of a shortcut. And the three funds who flew to meet me, all three of them are one is ed tech, one is health tech, and then Left Lane. So they all three really understood what we were doing. So I think that helped.
And the from the point of getting that term sheet to the point of close, like what was that process like? So the conviction,
Yeah,
getting that conviction early and being
yeah.
able to line, with the partner, but with
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, so we were oversubscribed, so there was a little bit of renegotiating on the terms. We ended up raising a little bit of a higher valuation than initially agreed upon, and raising a little bit more money than initially agreed upon. And we worked together on that, right? Well, how do we want? Let's not just bring in more money. How are we gonna use the funds? What makes sense here? And it was to get a strategic in that we were really excited about that had a minimum threshold. So the partnership just out of the gate, right? Post term sheet where we're already working together on, well, we could punt and tell them to do a safe, right? We could close this, do a safe, just having those conversations about how we want to run the business from a financial perspective. So that was kind of a good, just out of the gate, let's work together. To answer your question directly, it was about 30 days to close. Even my legal team was like, "Do you really need to move like this fast?" And I'm like, "Is there any reason we don't?" Like, and it was a ton. I will tell you, Jason, the post term sheet to close was just as much work as getting to that term sheet, right? I mean, it is. And we had to be really transparent. Our revenue cycle management, we're in healthcare, it's not spectacular, right? We didn't have anybody in it. We were outsourcing it. We were doing the best that we could. We are obviously growing like a weed. And they brought in, auditors to audit our books and see it. And we were very transparent. We were like, hey, this is something that's on the roadmap for Q1. I'm comfortable talking about it now because it's now behind us and we have it very much. It's locked down. It was not locked down in September, right? And so, we just were as transparent and honest about where we were with different pieces of the business, and that helped it. It went pretty smoothly. I mean, there's a lot of legal stuff that we had to clean up and notes and missing signatures and backdates that we couldn't use because our legal team wanted to be really, really clean. And it was a pretty expensive legal bill, and it's one of my least favorite parts of the job. But yeah, it took about 30 days. So I think we got the term sheet in the middle of October, and then closed the first week of December.
uh,
45 days.
the timing of that is one. There's so many questions around timing because one, it's like the bottom of the market when it comes to
Bottom. We were at the
venture capital.
very bottom. Yeah.
Like there was the trickling in a few deals here and there, and you were one of those, and an accelerated deal. And that just goes to your level of execution, the problem that you're solving, and Something you brought up earlier about the market size, convincing the investor of the market size, and how you kind of immediately could qualify a VC whether or not they're going to be a fit if they couldn't understand your market or not. Because
Yeah.
this is valuable feedback for a lot of
Yeah.
founders. If you're chasing an investor trying to say we're going to be huge, the market's
Yeah.
huge, and they're still asking questions about it,
Yeah.
you can probably write that investor
Yep.
off as far as writing a check because
Yep.
might still ask you questions, they might still engage with you, they might spin your wheels, but if
Yep.
you can't get conviction around the market, like you're not in a good place. So it's wise of you to kind of recognize that early on and kind of cherry pick the people to pursue um, with that in mind, because I think that's an incredibly important note to be conscious of.
I always ask about what they like about our competition. I mean, so this is back to the social work 101, right? I ask the investor as many questions as I can get, right? And the seasoned ones pepper you. And I usually be like, you clearly know what you're doing. You've got a million questions. Can I just sneak a couple in really quickly? And they honestly respect that, right? They're used to zoom, zoom, zoom. I'm going to hit you with my 10, 15 questions. I'm going to jot them down, move to the next, right? And so I found it really meaningful to be like, what did you like? Who have you seen in the space? Right? That's a question I always ask. Who have you seen in the space, whether it's broader pediatric mental health, whatever it is? What'd you like about them? What'd you not like about them? Right? And anything that they said they liked about them, I would amplify the things that we do that mirror the thing that they like. Right? And then if they said, oh, we don't like that, it's an in-person blah, 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 so it doesn't scale. I think that's the beauty about our model, right? Is we're 100% virtual. We could literally serve every learner. There's not one. We are serving kids on mountaintops and out in rural Georgia and everything in between. And you can just sense the little like, okay, I'm kind of like lean in, right? Just let me a little. Tell me more about how you are, how you're, And so I think try as best you can, if this is like advice giving corner, to ask them as many questions as you can to try to understand what motivates them. It's the Dale Carnegie, it's all the books that you read, but it's really important to understand why they are on the other side of that call with you right now, right? That helped immensely in navigating who I thought had the real potential to write a term sheet.
And you control the dialogue so well with those questions, and like if this is the key takeaway from the this conversation is asking that question, like who have you seen in this space and what did you like and not like about them. That is such a profoundly impactful question to ask in that meeting to really one test their have they really done any
They
research.
may just be ignored. Like, the colors, the brands, really, like you just, yeah. Sorry, Jason, I didn't cut you off, but you're exactly right. Like, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's something that if a founder takes anything from this, add that to your question list in your next capital raise. And also, you notice body language. Like body language is a huge signal. Obviously, it's not
Yep.
as easy as the virtual conversation as it is in person, but it's something that when I pitched, my first couple company, my first company was like nothing. We thought we were the greatest thing ever, but it wasn't good market fit or whatever. And you can just see the body, like you can see like the VC just kind of like, yeah,
Yep.
okay,
Yep.
all right,
Yep.
and you tell yourself like, oh no, I'm awesome, like like you ignore the body language when in reality you should be trying to like what you lure them in, like get them to lean in. If you see VCs leaning in, engaging, you have a much more positive signal to kind of pursue as opposed to any kind of negative body language or lack of questions or engagement. If you just pitched and you walked out, it's not going anywhere.
9 times out of 10, the only way to reverse that lean back is to ask them a question.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
the only way. You have to get them to talk to you. It's very counterintuitive, but the smarter they feel and the more interested it's how do they feel, especially in that initial call. Because you also have to be likable, right? Because you're going to spend a ton of time together. There's no escaping that. They have to like you. You have to have common interest, but that's going to be in call two or call three. Like the first call hurdle is you just need the one lean in where they're like, I'm going to talk to other folks in the team. It's like, I'm going to socialize this. And usually that's BS, but sometimes it's real, right? And you'll know. I don't want to advocate for don't send follow-ups, but like if you meet a VC twice and they're like, I'm going to talk to the team and I'll get back to you, and they're not getting back to you, you can go watch. She's just not that into you, and that's all you need to know about whether they're going to be getting back to you or not. You're
yeah.
just going to know.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't hurt to follow up, but yeah, if you continue to follow up and hear crickets, or you just kind of get, oh, we'll get back to you, it's dead. And
Yeah,
add them maybe to your investor update list
that's
if you
right.
care to, but move
That's
on.
right.
Stop hoping that they're going to write you a check. I can't tell you how many founders I've spoken to. Oh yeah, we've got about 2 million soft circled. And I was like, that's a pretty soft circle.
Yeah. When I told one of my board members, we got 40 people in the data room, he's like, okay, that's cool. He was just like, I don't know, that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah,
I'm glad you're happy, but doesn't matter. Like that's just for fun for them. They're bored. They're not making any deals. They're just, So it was grounding, right? Where he's like,
yeah,
none of it matters until that contract's in your hands, and then we'll talk business. But yeah, I mean, they'll waste your time all the live long day, right? Can you get me this? Can you do me that? Where's that contract? Did you do the suck too? Did you get this? Can you add this person to your data room? Will you be at health? Like would love to grab coffee. They're going to do that all day long. It's their job, right? And so
yeah.
we try to be really focused on let's get from A to B as quickly as possible.
No, it's an impressive story, and just everything you overcame, and just the market that everyone else was in. Pretty discouraged, and especially us.
Yeah,
Companies raise capital. We were dealing with just like crickets of
yeah,
VCs not even knowing if they have a capital call that's going to get the capital's actually get called. Like it was pretty chaotic. So the fact that you found the right investors that and also not waiting, like not trying to create that bidding, because you lost it, and you're right, going into nailing that timing of before Christmas, because basically 2 weeks before Christmas, in most cases, like you got the term sheet in October, which was clutch, because going into Thanksgiving to Christmas is just dead zone. Like people will
well,
work.
we use that. We use that. We want this done before December 1st, right? Like you want it done, we want it done. I don't care what lawyers say. No one wants to go into December. That certainly helped expedite things. It was a really good time to do it because they didn't want to go into
Yeah,
middle of late
no one
December.
like VCs usually take those like full 4 or 5 weeks off and
Yeah,
don't do very much unless they have a deal to get done, and then they just work on that one thing,
yeah.
which is
You said something, Jason, that I want to make sure I touch on before I forget. It seems very obvious, but make sure they have money. Like I know it sounds obvious, but I will tell you there are probably a half a dozen to a dozen calls where I was like, "What fund are you investing out of? How many deals do you have left to do this year?" And some of them said zero, right? They're like, "We're in the middle of raising the first tranche of the next fund, right?" And I just cross them off. I'm like, "That's out. Like they have no money to invest. They're just gonna wait and wait and wait." So it seems super obvious, but make sure the VC has money before you go through a really deep process with them.
and specifically net new capital investment. So like VCs always have like the reserves if they have a previous fund,
That's
but
not for you.
it's not for
That's
you.
not
Yeah, it's
that's
not for
not
the
for
new
you.
deal.
Yeah.
That's for the
Yeah.
companies they've already invested in, and
That's
so
right.
this has come up on every single podcast we've done.
Really?
Founders basically being and sharing this exact same advice, which
Yeah.
I see as a huge issue. Is just
Yeah.
like, when was your last deal? Like
Yeah.
how many more
Yeah.
deals do you
Totally.
have in the pipe?
That's
And
right.
that's such an important qualifying question, which in most cases can be answered just by going onto Crunchbase or other
Yep.
platforms and just being able to quickly identify,
Yep.
are they doing deals? Yes or no.
Yep. Yep.
And that's something we do at Thunder. We calculate investor velocity.
Yep.
What's their actual velocity of deal making, and which of those
Yep.
are new versus existing, and
Yeah.
taking those into consideration, because it's not worth chasing VCs that don't have checks to write.
I'm biased, but I'm going to plug Left Lane. I mean, I know they're super active. They're an awesome fund. I've got to imagine they're on your list of
Yeah.
folks doing a ton of deals, and they were great to work with.
No, I'm sure they're gonna love hearing that.
Yeah, got my plug in for them.
So we talked a lot of good stuff. You
Yeah.
had a great success story. What were some of the
What sucked?
ones? Yeah, what sucked?
Yeah, I mean it's super nerve wracking. I mean I wear a Whoop and I don't think my resting heart rate came below like 80 during those 2 weeks of October where I wasn't sure. You really have to go all in. Like it's an open and close, right? You can't just string it on and hope and maybe it's a yes and maybe like I was like it's either going to happen or it's not, and if it doesn't, we had a backup plan, right? Back to the internals. We need another $1 million. Let's get this to 2 million, 3 million, 4 million, 5 million. Like then we'll go back out, right? So we had a backup plan. One of the bumpiest pieces was we had the term sheet, and then we had another term sheet, and that we wanted to try and get both of them. And the second one was more of a strategic investor, and there wasn't enough money for our pro rata was going to suck up too much in the round. We didn't want to over raise. The terms were terrific with left lane. Um, and we had to go to a lot of folks who had pro rata and especially early investors and say, hey, we're not going to be able to get you any of your pro rata. And then we had to go to some funds and say, and individual investors and say, and they legally have pro rata, right? Be like, hey, we can, you know, we really can probably only get you like 30 to 40% of your pro rata. And everybody said, that's incredible. That's awesome that you've raised the Series A in this environment. We could not be absolutely. Where do we sign? That's terrific. We'll take whatever you'll give us, except for one who was really, really frustrated about it and gave us the runaround, and even in an email said like, this is course for legal action. This is, and that was really disheartening, right? Because you're working long hours and you're grinding away and you finally get this piece of paper that says your company can live for a couple more years, and odds say that you get past that Series A stage and you're far more likely to survive than, I mean, I've been doing this for 4 years, right? Just trying to survive 5 years and got this piece of paper, and then there's this person who's like kind of threatening legal action. In the end, it they got full pro rata. And other people were not super pumped about it, but we had a difficult decision to make, and yeah, it was an uncomfortable period for sure. And I lean back on my background as a clinician and try to understand their motives behind it, and I think looking back, I could have done a better job of setting the table around why this was happening and why we wanted this other investor to be a part of it, because then people start to feel like, well, why are they more important than me when I've been around longer than them? So I understand the two sides of the argument, but it was a pretty bumpy week or two where it went from like, this is a slam dunk, everything's amazing, to like, holy smokes, this is really gonna get die on the vine because of this thing here. So we were able to get around it. It was probably the most uncomfortable moment. I think the other one was, you get to know people really, really well. I mean, I met with some folks 10 times where I was like, this person's going to be on my cap table, and they're going to lead it, and it's going to be amazing. I'm going to go see them in San Francisco, and then for them to be like, yeah, we just can't quite get there. It's like, how is that possible, right? And so like, that does happen, right? It wasn't like, we met left lane and we got engaged a week later. Like we met with a lot of people for a number of meetings, and I thought like, this is awesome. This is clearly a fit. They did all the lean in stuff. We did the partner stuff. They did everything said green light. And then at the last minute, they're like, yeah, we just can't get there. So I think, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's the unfortunate reality is like you can't. I always like to say you can't spend the money till you got the money, and a lot of founders get excited that, oh, we had such great meetings, oh, they keep meeting with us. There's all, there's so much behind the scenes on how VCs work, and a lot of just human nature stuff that ends up blowing up deals more than anything. Or certain existing relationships, or someone has like a blackball, basically like blackball you and like write you off, because for whatever reason. I was talking to another founder where, a personal experience with their mother made them not decide to move forward. It's just like,
Yeah.
we're going to make you money.
Yeah.
What does this have to do with anything?
I know for one of us, and we were meeting with a fund that primarily does ed tech, and the whole time they're like, we're so excited to get into healthcare. We could see an ed tech angle for you. And I think at the end of the day, they just actually weren't ready for healthcare, and so even they themselves are fallible, like they don't,
Yeah.
they think they do, and then they don't. And so I do it's easy for me to be like, I don't take it personally because we closed the Series A. But look, if my company was floundering right now, and I might have a different feeling towards it.
And so you kind of brought up something a while back, and I want to kind of circle back to it. You kind of mentioned you kind of had to deputize your CTO to take over the operations because you really had to go all in on this fundraise.
Yeah.
How did you manage your time? How did, like, what was that experience to kind of be able to solely focus on fundraising?
I wouldn't say solely, because at the time I had twin 6-month-olds and a 4-year-old. So it wasn't just fundraising.
Yeah.
It was caring for those kiddos too. So the day typically was, I'd wake up I'd sleep in as much as I possibly could. So like I was not getting up and getting in an ice bath, right? I would sleep until my 4-year-old came into my room because every other night my wife and I would switch getting up in the middle of the night with the twins to feed them. So I would get every ounce of sleep I could get and then take him to school, and work, and then work ends at 5. Like you've got two parents, three kids, you can do the math. Work ended at 5, spent 2 hours with the kids, and then I would spend from 7 to 9 p.m. That was like my email prospect time, right? That was heads down, throw on an episode of Succession and email for 2 hours, right? And that worked, right? That worked for me. And then I made it a rule, if I was going to travel, I only traveled once a month. And so, I'm in Richmond. Fortunately, there's a direct flight in San Francisco. So I would go out to San Francisco, go for 2 days. I actually took my family one time. All of us went out to San Francisco. Um,
Twin 6-month-olds. You took them to San Francisco. That's a
yeah,
handful.
yeah, I could find the photo. There's a photo of all of us at the Golden Gate Bridge, and I can tell you in that moment we are not as happy as we look in that photo. But we did it, we did it. And we went out there, and left lane's in New York, which is a 45-minute flight. So I mean, it's awesome. I've got family in New York. I've got friends in New York, so I can go up for a day or two and come back, and it can happen. It can be really quick. So I've tried to carve out half of my time during work hours to do investor pitches. Like from 12 to 5, it was like I'm going to meet with investors, and so in the morning I would get like an update from Maury as to how things were going and where I was needed in the business to make sure that really it was drive growth. Like, do I need to meet with anybody to pitch on like a referral source, or do I need to talk to a payer? That was, and then he was managing the team, right? If anybody needed anything on the team side, he was doing all that. And then we had a part-time COO who was really eating all the crow from like a billings perspective and getting me all the numbers that I needed for investors and running the pivot tables and that kind of stuff. So I'm really grateful that the team knew, right? They knew, come August, that this is that we were striving towards, and I try to give them updates on how things were going. But that was how I split the day. Try to do the business in the morning, the investor meetings in the afternoon, and then the kind of prospecting heads down at night.
So, from what I can take from that is structure and just sticking to your
Yeah.
structure, and also team, like being able to trust your team to execute while you go take on this other task
Yep.
is an incredibly important aspect of what you've highlighted here. And it also just shows that you have a good team, which is something also that, makes it easier to fundraise. If they can
Yep.
handle the business without you,
Yep.
um, that's a positive signaling to the VCs as well. So that I'm
And
glad.
things will drop. Like things are going to drop. You're not going to get every customer. You're not going to you're going to mess up a billing cycle. Like things are going to drop. And so that's why I try to communicate with the team. Like, hey, these next 60 days, just bear with us. I feel really good about where we are as a business. I'm very confident we're going to find a financial partner here. Um, but it's going to be hard for everybody. Like, everyone's kind of sharing in it a bit.
Yeah, no, it's a great story. And if we can wrap up here, what you've already shared a ton of good nuggets here in terms of information that founders can take away and try to apply to their own business. But if you can kind of share either one main point or a couple tips to founders that are seeking to go raise in this coming market, what would you say?
Um, so there's people are of two minds when finding a Series A lead. It's either relationship building, like you send them a quarterly or even a monthly update of we said we're going to do this and then you do it. You said we're going to do this and you're going to do it. Obviously, you've got to do the thing you say you're going to do, right? So it's key. You
Yeah,
can't not do it
number
because
one
they're not going
criteria.
to. Yeah, they're not going to love that. Or you just kind of do stealth, right? You don't send them anything, and then kabah, like here we are. I've never met you, and look how awesome our business is, and are you in or out, right? I'm the former. That's just who I am. I'm a relationship builder. That's my background. I found that worked really well for us. The first two term sheets that came in, were two, like we had been meeting with Left Lane for over a year on and off. And then the other one we had met 3 years ago, and I had been chatting with them on and off for every 6 months. So that's me, right? But know which one you are, right? If you're the big presentation person out of stealth, or if you're the relationship builder. Because if you're the relationship builder, it's a process. It's going to take time, and I think that was the thing that was really my biggest takeaway in the whole process was finding folks who were interested in the business, and then giving them updates and nuggets over time to continue to pique the interest, and and build on that relationship, and hopefully it ends up in a partnership.
I think that's fantastic advice to leave with founders, and I completely agree. I think there are those two paths, and the relationship one. I think a lot of founders get antsy. They don't want to put in that time, or they need the money now, and it
Yeah,
basically removes their ability to execute on that front. So it's with those all those VCs you meet as a founder, pick the ones that you thought were interesting or were interested in you, and kind of keep them up to date. And those will be your opportunities down the road when the time comes. So just because you always get the too early, oh, you guys are too
yeah,
early, you guys are too early, and it's like, okay, well, test them on that. You follow up when you're not early anymore and see how they respond.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Nothing gets an investor interested in your business like saying you're not fundraising. So send
yes,
them those quarterly updates and say like, hey, this is where we are. We may raise at the end of this year, but we may not because things are going so well. We may not need to raise. Like, put that as a disclaimer at the
I
end of
don't
every
need you.
email you send. Yeah, I mean it's silly, but I actually think it does play a part.
As long as it's coming from an authentic place, I agree. I think some
Yes.
founders try to gamify it and try to play those cards, but it's inauthentic, so it just doesn't roll off the tongue the same. So um,
Yes. 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 That's a key
it's a part of our
caveat.
strategy when we coach founders on these are your two paths. Like it's always better to play the long game and manage a successful company to the point where you kind of have that, as you talked about, success and momentum in the business, and your fundraise time cuts dramatically. If you kind of maintain
Yep.
those relationships and you focus on the business, it becomes much easier to raise capital. Especially when
Totally.
when you don't need the money, that's when the money comes.
That's
Unfortunately.
right. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate the time today. I think we really got some amazing information to kind of share with other founders to help inspire them. If any of the founders wanted to learn more either about Answers Now or
Yeah.
follow you, what would you tell them to go?
Yeah. Just email me, Jeff@getanswersnow.com.
Easy enough. Well, really appreciate the time today, Jeff. This has been incredibly insightful, and look forward to kind of following your journey some more and seeing what comes next.
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate it.
Awesome.